Nadia Carter walked into the bar for nothing more than a quiet drink. To Ray Maddox, she looked like just another black woman alone at the counter, an easy mark for a cheap laugh. He swaggered up with his crew behind him, every step daring her silence. Then came the slap, loud, crude, echoing through the bar as his crew roared with laughter. But what Ray couldn't see was the truth behind her calm eyes. 20 years of Delta Force training, missions buried in classified files, a lifetime of precision and restraint. He thought she'd bow her head and take it. He was wrong. And in one sudden move, Nadia Carter was about to remind everyone in that room what happens when arrogance lays hands on a soldier. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the grimy windows of Bulldog's Den. The bar's worn wooden door creaked open as Nadia Carter stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Country music twanged from an old jukebox in the corner, competing with the click of pool balls and scattered conversations. The familiar smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke filled her nostrils. Nadia moved with quiet confidence, her footsteps barely audible on the scuffed floorboards. Her muscled arms, toned from years of military service, showed beneath her white tank top. A small scar on her right shoulder, a reminder of a mission in Kandahar, caught the light. She chose a seat at the far end of the bar, away from the cluster of regulars nursing their beers. The wooden bar stool creaked as she settled in, her posture relaxed but alert. Old habits died hard. The bartender, a middle-aged man with graying temples and tired eyes, approached. "What'll it be?" he asked, wiping his hands on a dingy bar towel. "Whiskey. Neat," Nadia replied, her voice low and steady. She placed a 20 on the counter, the motion smooth and deliberate. The bartender nodded, reaching for a bottle on the shelf behind him. Nadia's gaze swept the room, taking in every detail without seeming to look. 3 bikers played pool in the corner, their leather vests displaying patches she recognized from her intelligence briefings years ago. 2 couples occupied booths along the wall, keeping to themselves. A lone man dozed at the other end of the bar, his head nodding toward his half-empty glass. The whiskey arrived, amber liquid catching the weak light from the dusty overhead fixtures. Nadia wrapped her fingers around the glass, letting out a slow breath. The day at the veteran shelter had been long but rewarding. She'd helped a young Marine work through his paperwork for disability benefits and counseled an Army sergeant struggling with civilian life. The work grounded her, gave her purpose beyond the classified missions that had defined her career. She took a small sip, savoring the burn. Behind her, someone laughed too loudly, trying to draw attention. Nadia didn't turn around. Instead, she watched the bartender's reflection in the mirror behind the bottles, noting how his shoulders tensed. The front door banged open, letting in a blast of hot air and the rumble of motorcycle engines. Heavy boots thudded on the wooden floor, accompanied by the jingle of chains and the creak of leather. The atmosphere in the bar shifted immediately. Conversations died. Pool cues stopped mid-stroke, and several patrons suddenly became very interested in their drinks. In the mirror's reflection, Nadia watched 5 men enter. Their leather cuts marked them as members of the Iron Dogs MC, the local motorcycle club that controlled most of the illegal activity in 3 counties. Their leader, Ray Bulldog Maddox, stood a head taller than the others, his massive frame taking up more space than necessary. Nadia had read his file during her first week in town. 3 arrests for assault, suspected ties to drug trafficking, but no convictions. The local law enforcement's reluctance to pursue charges told her everything she needed to know about the depth of corruption in the area. She took another sip of whiskey, maintaining her calm demeanor. The jukebox switched to a Merle Haggard song about outlaws, the irony not lost on her. The bartender had retreated to the other end of the bar, suddenly very busy wiping already clean glasses. The bikers claimed their usual table, their voices growing louder as they ordered their first round. Nadia could feel eyes on her back, but didn't acknowledge them. She'd spent years perfecting the art of being present, but unremarkable, of blending in while remaining aware of every potential threat. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass as she recalled similar situations in dozens of countries. Different languages, different weapons, but the same fundamental dynamics of power and intimidation. She'd faced down warlords and arms dealers, survived firefights and ambushes. This was familiar territory, even if the setting was different. "Hey, Bobby!" Bulldog's voice boomed across the bar. "Where's that beer? Don't make me come back there and pour it myself." The bartender, Bobby, hurried to deliver their drinks, his hands slightly shaky as he set down the bottles. Laughter erupted from their table, mean-spirited and sharp. Nadia noticed how the other patrons seemed to shrink into themselves, trying to become invisible. She checked her watch. 6:45 p.m. The shelter would be closing now. Mark and Sarah taking care of the evening routines she'd taught them. Good kids, both of them. Army veterans trying to find their way back to civilian life. They reminded her of herself, years ago, learning to live with the weight of what she'd seen and done. The noise from the bikers' table grew louder. A chair scraped against the floor, followed by heavy footsteps. In the mirror, Nadia watched Bulldog rise from his seat, his eyes fixed on her. He nudged one of his companions, jerking his head in her direction with a smirk that promised trouble. His crew exchanged knowing looks, settling in to watch whatever show their leader had planned. Ray Bulldog Maddox started moving toward the bar, his path deliberate and predatory. His reflection grew larger in the mirror as he approached, a wolf sizing up what he thought was easy prey. He had no way of knowing that the quiet woman in the white tank top had once commanded elite military units, that her calm exterior masked years of combat experience and tactical training. The distance between them shortened with each heavy step. The jukebox switched to a Hank Williams song as Ray's footsteps drew closer. Nadia kept her eyes forward, watching his approach in the mirror while maintaining her practiced stillness. She took another small sip of whiskey, letting the warm liquid linger on her tongue. The other patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the coming confrontation. A couple near the door quietly settled their tab, slipping out before whatever was about to happen could unfold. The pool players stopped their game entirely, cues held loose in their hands as they watched their leader stalk toward the bar. Ray's heavy breathing carried the smell of cheap beer as he got closer. His reflection showed a wide, cruel smile spreading across his face, the kind of smile that had probably preceded countless acts of intimidation in this very bar. The fluorescent lights caught the silver rings on his fingers, makeshift brass knuckles that had left their mark on more than a few unfortunate faces. "Well, well," Ray drawled, loud enough for his crew to hear. "What do we have here? Don't usually see your kind in my establishment." Nadia didn't respond. She lifted her glass again, the motion smooth and controlled. Her peripheral vision tracked his every movement while she appeared focused on her drink. Years of training had taught her to read a situation through the smallest details. The slight shift of weight before an attack, the tensing of muscles before a strike. Behind Ray, his crew had arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, ready for whatever entertainment their leader had planned. They elbowed each other, snickering and whispering. The bartender had retreated to the far end of the bar, suddenly very interested in organizing bottles that didn't need organizing. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Ray said, moving closer. His massive frame now blocked most of the light from the overhead fixtures, casting a shadow across the bar. "Ain't you got any manners?" Nadia set her glass down carefully, perfectly centered on the coaster. Her fingers remained loosely curled around it, ready but relaxed. She'd been in this position before, not in bars, but in compounds and safe houses across the world, waiting for the right moment while maintaining absolute control. Ray leaned against the bar, intentionally crowding her space. "Come on, sugar. Don't be like that. We're all friends here." He looked back at his crew, who laughed on cue. The sound echoed off the walls, harsh and artificial. The air in the bar grew thicker, charged with tension. Even the jukebox seemed to be playing softer, as if the machine itself was trying to avoid drawing attention. Nadia remained still, her breathing steady and controlled. She could smell the leather of Ray's vest, the mixture of cigarettes and motor oil that clung to him. "Maybe she's shy," one of Ray's crew called out. "Why don't you help her loosen up, boss?" Ray's grin widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Yeah, maybe that's it. Just needs a little encouragement to be friendly." He shifted his weight, and Nadia tracked the movement in her mind, calculating angles and distances without seeming to move. Her muscles remained relaxed, but ready, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. She'd spent years perfecting this state of contained readiness. The next few seconds seemed to unfold in slow motion. Ray's arm drew back, his rings catching the light. His crew leaned forward, anticipating the moment. The remaining patrons held their breath, some looking away, others unable to tear their eyes from the scene. The slap landed hard against Nadia's right buttock, the sound sharp and loud in the quiet bar. Ray's laughter boomed out, joined by hoots and hollers from his crew. He turned toward them, arms spread wide in a gesture of triumph, clearly expecting to see his victim shrink in humiliation. Instead, Nadia moved. Years of close-quarters combat training took over. Her body responded with the fluid precision of countless drills and real-world applications. In one smooth motion, she pivoted on the bar stool, her right hand shooting out to capture Ray's wrist before he could fully withdraw it. Her grip found the pressure points between the tendons, her fingers applying precise force learned in special operations training. The movement was almost gentle at first, right up until it wasn't. She twisted his wrist at an angle that sent shooting pain up his arm. Using his own body weight and momentum against him, Ray's eyes widened in shock as his knees buckled. His bulk worked against him now, gravity pulling his large frame down as Nadia maintained the perfect pressure on his trapped wrist. He tried to resist, but each attempt at movement only increased the pain. The bar fell completely silent. The jukebox had hit a gap between songs, leaving nothing but the sound of Ray's surprised grunt as his knees hit the wooden floor. His crew stood frozen, their smirks replaced by open-mouthed shock at the sight of their leader, brought low by this seemingly harmless woman. Nadia leaned down, her movement controlled and precise. Her lips nearly touched Ray's ear as she spoke, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone used to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. "Touch me again," she whispered, maintaining the exact pressure needed to keep him immobile. "And you won't be using that hand." The threat hung in the air, made more powerful by its quiet delivery. Every person in the bar stood transfixed, witnessing something they'd never seen before. Their fearsome leader, the notorious Bulldog, brought to his knees by a woman half his size. The silence in the bar held for a moment longer, as Nadia released her grip on Ray's wrist with the same controlled precision she'd used to capture it. He stumbled backward, his boots scraping against the wooden floor as he fought to regain his balance. His face flushed a deep red that spread down his neck and disappeared into his leather vest. Ray clutched his wrist, rotating it carefully as if checking for damage. His eyes darted between Nadia and his crew, who shifted uncomfortably behind him. The mighty Bulldog had been brought low, and now everyone waited to see how he'd respond. "You," he started, his voice shaking with rage and embarrassment. His good hand clenched into a fist, the rings glinting under the bar lights. Nadia turned back to the bar, deliberately presenting her back to him, a clear message that she considered him no threat at all. She picked up her whiskey glass with the same steady hand that had just subdued him, studying the amber liquid as if it were the most interesting thing in the room. One of Ray's crew, a lanky man with a patchy beard, took a step forward. "Boss, you want us to—" "Shut up!" Ray snapped, cutting him off. His voice cracked slightly, undermining the command in his tone. The lanky man stepped back, merging with the rest of the uncertain crowd. The jukebox kicked in again, this time with Lynyrd Skynyrd's Simple Man. The familiar chords seemed to break some of the tension, reminding everyone that they were still in a bar on an ordinary night. A few patrons returned to their drinks, though their eyes kept darting back to the scene unfolding before them. Nadia lifted her glass to her lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The whiskey caught the light, golden and smooth. She savored it properly, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Her posture remained relaxed but alert, her body ready to respond to any foolish attempts at retaliation. Behind her, Ray's breathing was still heavy and irregular. She could hear him shifting his weight, probably trying to decide between his anger and his newfound wariness. His crew murmured among themselves, their usual bravado replaced by uncertain whispers. The bartender had edged closer again, perhaps sensing that the immediate danger had passed. He busied himself wiping down the already clean counter, carefully avoiding eye contact with anyone involved in the confrontation. Nadia set her empty glass down with a soft clink. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crisp $20 bill, placing it precisely next to the glass. The movement was smooth and unhurried, as if she were simply finishing a pleasant evening out. Ray found his voice again. "You think you can just—" "Your tab's covered, too," Nadia interrupted, adding another 20 without looking at him. Her voice carried easily through the bar, calm and clear. A few people at nearby tables couldn't suppress their snickers. That broke something in Ray. His face contorted with rage, the veins in his neck standing out. "You uppity—" "Don't!" Nadia cut him off again, finally turning to face him. Her eyes met his, and something in that steady gaze made him take a small step back. "You really don't want to finish that sentence." The bar caught its collective breath. Ray's crew looked between their leader and this woman, who seemed entirely unafraid of him, clearly unsure how to handle this unprecedented situation. The usual script of intimidation and violence had been completely derailed. Nadia stood up from her bar stool, her movements measured and controlled. She adjusted her tank top with casual precision, then ran a hand over her ponytail, smoothing it back into perfect order. Everything about her radiated calm competence. "Get her!" Ray suddenly shouted, his voice tight with desperation. But his crew hesitated, looking at each other uncertainly. They'd seen what she'd done to their leader with just one hand. None of them seemed eager to test their luck. Nadia walked toward the door, her steps unhurried but purposeful. The crowd parted before her, creating a clear path. Some nodded slightly as she passed. A few even smiled. She'd shown them something they'd never seen before. Someone standing up to the infamous bulldog and walking away. Ray's face twisted into an ugly snarl. "This ain't over," he shouted at her back. "You hear me? You'll regret this." Nadia reached the door and pushed it open, letting in a burst of cool night air. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the gravel, and crickets chirped in the darkness beyond. She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the area with practiced efficiency, checking sight lines, noting possible cover, identifying potential threats. The lot was half full of motorcycles and pickup trucks, their chrome and paint dulled by the yellow security lights. Nothing moved except the moths circling the lights and a stray piece of paper tumbling across the gravel. Ray's voice followed her out into the night, still shouting threats and obscenities. But his words seemed to lose power in the open air, becoming just another bit of background noise, like the crickets and the distant highway traffic. Nadia walked to her car, her keys already in hand. The familiar shape of her dark blue sedan waited exactly where she'd left it, undisturbed. She unlocked it and slipped inside, the leather seat embracing her like an old friend. Nadia's car purred softly as she turned onto her street, the headlights sweeping across familiar houses. The neighborhood was peaceful at this hour. Modest homes with well-kept lawns, American flags hanging from porches, and the occasional kid's bicycle left out in a driveway. She'd chosen this street specifically for its quiet normalcy, a place where she could blend in and build a new life. The dashboard clock read 10:47 p.m. A few windows still glowed with TV light, but most of her neighbors had already turned in for the night. Mrs. Peterson's cat watched from its usual perch on the front windowsill next door, its eyes reflecting green in the car's headlights. Nadia clicked her garage door opener, but something made her pause before pulling in. Years of training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, something felt off. She left the car idling in the driveway, its engine a low rumble in the night silence. The security light above her garage flickered on, triggered by her car's movement. The harsh fluorescent glow revealed what her headlights hadn't quite caught. Angry red letters sprayed across her white garage door. The paint was still wet, drips running down like blood. "You're dead." Her jaw tightened slightly, the only outward sign of her reaction. The words were crude, meant to inspire fear, but they mostly sparked a deep, cold anger. Not the hot rage that clouds judgment, but the kind that sharpens focus to a razor's edge. Nadia turned off her car and stepped out, her boots crunching softly on the concrete. The night air had cooled considerably, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and, now, the sharp chemical smell of spray paint. A dog barked somewhere down the street, then fell quiet. She approached the garage door slowly, scanning the area with practiced ease. The paint job was rushed, uneven letters betraying shaky hands, probably done within the last hour, given how wet it still was. The perpetrators would have needed a vehicle, likely a motorcycle given the timing and who she was dealing with. Mrs. Peterson's porch light clicked on. "Nadia? Is everything all right, dear?" The elderly woman's voice carried clearly in the night air, touched with concern. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Peterson," Nadia called back, keeping her voice steady and reassuring. "Just some kids with spray paint. Nothing to worry about." "Oh, those hooligans. Should I call the police?" "No need," Nadia replied. "I'll take care of it." She waited until Mrs. Peterson's light went off before moving closer to examine the damage. The paint was cheap stuff, probably from a hardware store. She reached out and ran her fingers across the still tacky surface, feeling the rough texture of the garage door beneath. Red paint stained her fingertips, the same color as the emergency chem lights she used to carry in combat zones. The sound of a motorcycle engine growled in the distance, then faded away. Nadia's muscles tensed automatically, but she forced herself to remain casual. No need to let the neighbors see anything unusual. She'd learned long ago that appearing ordinary was its own kind of armor. Walking to her front door, Nadia noted the small details that would tell her if anyone had tried to break in. The position of the welcome mat, the barely visible thread she always placed across the door frame, the slight marks she left on the handle. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Inside, she moved through her evening routine with deliberate precision. Check the back door. Locked. Windows. Secure. Phone. Charged. She drew the curtains, adjusted the thermostat, and filled a glass with water from the tap. Normal actions that helped maintain the illusion of normalcy, even as her mind catalogued defensive positions and escape routes. The kitchen was spotless, just as she always kept it. The counters gleamed under the soft overhead light, dishes dried and put away, everything in its proper place. Control what you can control. It was one of the first lessons she'd learned in Delta Force. Nadia sat at her kitchen table, the solid oak surface cool beneath her forearms. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tick from the heating system. She reached down and opened the bottom drawer, pushing aside cooking utensils to reveal a small wooden box hidden at the back. The box was hand-carved maple, a gift from her late husband. The wood had darkened with age, smooth from years of handling. She lifted it carefully onto the table, her fingers finding the familiar notch that opened the lid. Inside, nestled in dark blue velvet, lay her Delta Force medals. The gold and silver surfaces caught the kitchen light, each one representing missions she could never talk about. Lives saved and lost in places that didn't officially exist. She rarely looked at them anymore. They belonged to a different life, a different person. But tonight, as her fingers traced the edges of a silver star, Nadia felt the weight of her past pressing against her present. The medals weren't just decorations. They were reminders of what she was capable of when pushed. She'd earned each one by staying calm in chaos, by protecting others, by refusing to back down when lives were at stake. The red paint on her garage door wasn't just a threat, it was a challenge. These men thought they were dealing with an easy target, a lone woman they could intimidate into submission. They had no idea they were poking a tiger with a stick. Nadia wiped her paint-stained fingers across the leg of her jeans, leaving red streaks on the denim. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes had taken on the hard focus her old unit would have recognized instantly. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Nadia pulled into the sheriff's department parking lot. The building was a squat, brick structure that had seen better days, with faded lettering on the windows and patches of missing mortar between the bricks. 2 patrol cars sat out front, their white paint dulled by road dust. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the worn linoleum floor. The front desk area smelled of stale coffee and old paper files. A young deputy looked up from his crossword puzzle, his expression shifting from boredom to wariness as Nadia approached. "Can I help you?" he asked, straightening his posture slightly. "I need to file a report," Nadia said, keeping her voice steady and professional. "Is Sheriff Wilkes available?" The deputy picked up his phone, muttered something into it, then nodded toward a row of hard plastic chairs along the wall. "Have a seat. He'll be with you shortly." Nadia sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. The walls were covered with faded wanted posters and outdated community notices. A clock ticked loudly, its hands moving with excruciating slowness. 20 minutes passed before heavy footsteps approached from the hallway. Sheriff Cal Wilkes filled the doorway of his office, his uniform stretched tight across his substantial belly. His badge caught the fluorescent light as he shifted, a flash of gold that matched the signet ring on his thick finger. He didn't smile as he gestured for Nadia to enter. "What brings you in today?" Wilkes asked, lowering himself into his creaking desk chair. His office was cluttered with papers, empty coffee cups, and a collection of hunting trophies mounted on the walls. A mounted deer head stared down with glass eyes, its expression frozen in permanent surprise. Nadia sat in the chair across from him, noting how it was positioned slightly lower than his, a small power play she'd seen countless times before. "Someone vandalized my property last night," she said. "Spray-painted threats on my garage door." Wilkes picked up a pen, twirling it between his fingers. "Threats, you say? What kind of threats?" "Death threats," Nadia replied, "along with racial slurs. The paint was still wet when I got home." "Uh-huh." Wilkes scratched something on a notepad. "Any idea who might have done this?" "Yes," Nadia said. "Ray Maddox and his crew from Bulldog's Den. There was an incident at the bar last night." "Oh?" Wilkes interrupted, his eyebrows rising. "What kind of incident?" Nadia described the events at the bar, keeping her tone neutral and factual. As she spoke, she noticed Wilkes's expression growing increasingly dismissive, his pen tapping against the desk with impatience. "So, you put hands on Mr. Maddox?" he asked, emphasizing the "you" in a way that made it clear where his sympathies lay. "I defended myself against sexual assault," Nadia corrected firmly. "And now I'm being threatened." Wilkes leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight. "Sounds to me like you might have overreacted. Ray's a good old boy, just having some fun. No need to make a federal case out of it. A good old boy who assaulted me and then vandalized my home with death threats," Nadia said, her voice level but intense. "I want to file a formal complaint." The sheriff sighed heavily, as if she was being unreasonable. "Look, Ms." He glanced down at his notepad. "Carter, this is a small town. We handle things differently here. Less paperwork, more understanding, if you know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean," Nadia replied. "But I still want to file that complaint." Wilkes's face hardened slightly. He pulled out a form from his desk drawer and began filling it out with exaggerated slowness. "Address?" Nadia provided her information, watching as he deliberately misspelled her street name. "And you say this happened? When, exactly?" "Last night, between 10 and 11 p.m. "Funny," Wilkes said, not looking up. "Nobody else reported seeing anything suspicious in that neighborhood." "The paint was still wet," Nadia repeated. "I have pictures on my phone." "Well, you know how it is with these things," Wilkes said, his tone patronizing. "Hard to prove who did what. Could have been anyone. Kids, maybe. Or," he paused meaningfully, "could have done it yourself, for attention." Nadia's expression didn't change, but her voice took on an edge of steel. "Are you suggesting I spray-painted death threats on my own garage door?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Wilkes replied, holding up his hands in a gesture of false innocence. "Just exploring all possibilities." "That's police work, ma'am." "Will you investigate or not?" Nadia pressed, leaning forward slightly in her chair. The sheriff's facade of professional courtesy cracked. His lips curled into a sneer, eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "Maybe if you people knew your place, this wouldn't happen." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Nadia stood slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. The overhead fluorescent light flickered, casting strange shadows across Wilkes's face as he stared up at her with barely concealed contempt. Without another word, Nadia turned and walked out of the office. Her boots clicked against the linoleum floor, each step measured and precise. The young deputy at the front desk quickly looked down at his crossword puzzle as she passed, pretending he hadn't heard everything. The morning sun felt too bright as she stepped outside, the air thick with humidity. Nadia walked to her car, feeling the weight of the sheriff's gaze through his office window. The system she had once served and protected had just made it clear. She was on her own. The veteran shelter occupied an old brick warehouse on the edge of town, its weathered facade softened by window boxes full of bright marigolds. Inside, the morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating the worn but clean common area where a dozen veterans gathered for coffee and conversation. Nadia pushed open the heavy front door, the familiar smell of coffee and wood polish greeting her. The tension from her meeting with Sheriff Wilkes began to ease as she stepped into this sanctuary. Here, at least, she could make a difference. "Morning, Sergeant Major!" Marcus Hill's voice carried across the room. He stood by the coffee station, tools spread out on the counter, around a dismantled coffee maker. His dark hair was slightly messy, and his T-shirt already had a grease stain despite the early hour. "Just Nadia here, Marcus," she reminded him with a small smile. "How's our patient doing?" Marcus gestured at the scattered parts. "Terminal case of calcium buildup. But I think we can save her." His hands, steady and sure from years of military mechanical work, moved confidently among the pieces. Nadia pulled up a chair beside him, examining the disassembled machine. Reminds me of field stripping in M4, she observed, picking up a clogged filter basket. Except this one fights back with hot water, Marcus chuckled, rubbing a phantom burn on his hand. Already got me once this morning. They worked side by side, Marcus explaining each step as he cleaned and reassembled the parts. Other veterans drifted by, offering commentary and coffee-making war stories. The atmosphere was light, therapeutic in its simplicity. "Pass me that descaling solution," Marcus said, pointing to a blue bottle. "This thing's got more buildup than a forward operating base porta-potty." Nadia handed him the bottle, laughing. "That's quite an image I didn't need this morning." "Speaking of things we don't need," Marcus said, his voice dropping slightly, "how are you holding up? Word gets around in a small town." Nadia's hands stilled for a moment. "News travels fast, I see." "Pete from the gas station saw the whole thing at Bulldog's," Marcus explained, focusing intently on scrubbing a particularly stubborn piece of scale. "Said you handled it like a pro." "I handled it," Nadia said simply, not elaborating. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the clicking of tools and quiet conversations from other veterans filling the air. The coffee maker slowly came back together under Marcus's skilled hands, each piece cleaned and properly aligned. "You know what I miss sometimes?" Marcus said, reconnecting the water lines. "The certainty. In the army, you knew who had your back. Out here?" He shrugged, leaving the thought unfinished. Nadia nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "The rules are different here," she said, "but the principles stay the same. We still look out for each other." Marcus smiled, his face brightening. "That we do." He flipped a switch, and the coffee maker hummed to life. "Would you listen to that?" Purring like a kitten. A small cheer went up from the veterans waiting nearby. Marcus filled a cup and handed it to Nadia with a flourish. "First test subject?" She took a sip and nodded approvingly. "Definitely better than the motor oil we were drinking before." The morning continued peacefully. Nadia moved through the shelter, checking in with veterans, helping with paperwork, and offering quiet words of encouragement where needed. This was why she'd chosen this place after leaving the service, the chance to help others find their footing again. Around mid-morning, Marcus approached her again. His earlier cheerfulness had dimmed, replaced by a worried frown. "Hey, Nadia, can we talk for a minute?" She followed him to a quiet corner of the shelter, noting the tension in his shoulders. "What's on your mind?" Marcus glanced around before speaking, his voice low. "I was here late last night, finishing up some maintenance work. Saw something that didn't sit right." Nadia waited patiently as Marcus gathered his thoughts. "There were bikers," he continued. "3 of them, on Harleys. They circled the block 4 times, real slow-like, kept looking at the shelter. I recognized one of them from Bulldog's crew." The morning's warmth seemed to fade as Nadia processed this information. Her expression hardened, though her voice remained calm. "What time was this?" "Around 11. I was locking up when I first noticed them." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "They weren't just passing through, Nadia. They were watching, studying the place." Nadia's mind quickly catalogued the shelter's vulnerabilities. Old locks, no security cameras, multiple ground-floor windows. Too many ways in, not enough ways out. "Did they see you?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "I stayed in the shadows. Old habits, you know." "Good instincts," Nadia said. She looked around the shelter, at the veterans going about their morning routines. Some were still struggling with civilian life, others finally finding their feet. All of them vulnerable. "I didn't want to worry you," Marcus said quietly. "But after what happened at the bar, I figured you should know." Nadia placed a hand on his shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You did the right thing, Marcus." "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the morning light play across the shelter's worn wooden floors. The coffee maker hummed in the background, a reminder of their earlier moment of peace. Marcus cleared his throat. What do you think they want? Nadia's expression remained controlled, but her eyes had taken on a familiar tactical focus. Ray wasn't just targeting her anymore. He was expanding his threats to include the people and places she cared about. The shelter, the veterans, her mission. The evening sun cast long shadows across the shelter's parking lot as Nadia and Marcus worked through their closing routine. She checked the locks on the supply closet while he emptied the coffee grounds and wiped down the counter. The familiar tasks had taken on a different weight after their morning conversation about the circling bikers. "You don't have to stay late," Nadia said, watching Marcus meticulously clean the coffee maker he'd fixed earlier. "I always do a thorough job," he replied, not looking up. "Besides, 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. The shelter felt different at night. The warm community space of daylight hours became a maze of shadows and blind corners. Every window was a potential entry point. Every dark corner a possible hiding spot. Nadia moved through the rooms with practiced efficiency, her military training unconsciously showing in how she cleared each space. Marcus followed her lead, his own service experience evident in how he positioned himself to watch the approaches while she locked up. They worked in comfortable silence, communicating with small gestures and nods, the natural rhythm of people trained to operate as a unit. "Last door," Nadia announced, pulling out the main entrance keys. The parking lot lights had flickered on, creating pools of yellow light in the growing dusk. A distant rumble of motorcycles caught their attention. Marcus tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "That sounds like more than 3 bikes." Nadia nodded, her expression calm but alert. "Get inside the doorway. Good cover, clear line of sight." The rumble grew louder, echoing off the buildings. Headlights appeared at the end of the street, sweeping across the lot in aggressive arcs. 5 motorcycles roared into view, their riders hunched forward like predators. Ray Bulldog Maddox led the pack, his massive frame made larger by a leather vest decorated with crude patches. The bikes circled the lot, kicking up gravel and dust, their engines thundering in the confined space. "Stay cool," Nadia said quietly to Marcus, noting how his shoulders had squared up for a fight. "Let them make the first move." The bikers pulled into a loose semicircle facing the shelter entrance. Ray cut his engine first, the sudden silence almost as intimidating as the noise had been. His crew followed suit, leaving only the tick of cooling engines and the harsh glare of headlights. "Well, well," Ray called out, his voice carrying a cruel edge. "If it ain't the uppity woman who thinks she can embarrass me in my own bar." He swung off his bike, boots crunching on gravel. "And look, she's got herself a pet monkey, too." Marcus took a half-step forward, but Nadia's hand shot out, stopping him. "Easy," she murmured. "That's what they want." Ray's crew spread out, creating a wider arc. They were all big men, chosen more for bulk than brains, wearing matching vests and mean expressions. 2 carried heavy chains wrapped around their fists. Another flexed a set of brass knuckles. "This your little charity house?" Ray asked, gesturing at the shelter with exaggerated curiosity. "Where you collect all the broken soldiers who can't hack it in the real world?" "Private property," Nadia stated clearly, her voice carrying across the lot. "You're not welcome here." Ray spat on the ground. "Ain't nothing private about it. This is my town." He took a few steps closer, trying to use his height to intimidate. "And in my town, people show proper respect." The other bikers called out ugly encouragement, their voices full of slurs and threats. Marcus's jaw clenched, but he held his position, following Nadia's lead. "Last warning," Ray growled, now close enough that Nadia could smell beer and cigarettes on his breath. "Get on your knees and apologize for that stunt you pulled, or we're going to redecorate this place. Maybe start with that fancy coffee machine your boy's so proud of." Nadia didn't back up an inch. Her voice remained steady, almost conversational. "You know what your problem is, Ray? You mistake fear for respect? She looked him directly in the eyes. I've seen real respect. Earned it. Given it. What you've got? It's just people too tired to fight back. Ray's face darkened with rage. He reached for her, his massive hand aiming for her throat. But Nadia wasn't there anymore. She'd shifted slightly, just enough that his grab caught empty air. Don't, she said quietly. The word carried such authority that Ray actually hesitated. Something in her stance, in the total absence of fear in her eyes, made him pause. You got lucky in the bar, he snarled, trying to cover his moment of uncertainty. But there's 5 of us now. And ain't no cameras out here to catch what happens next. Nadia took one precise step forward, positioning herself between the bikers and the shelter door. Her movement was smooth, controlled, and somehow more threatening than any aggressive gesture could have been. You don't want this fight, she said, her voice carrying clearly to every biker. The parking lot lights cast her shadow long behind her, a single dark line against their semicircle of threats. Something in her tone, or maybe in the way she stood, perfectly balanced, hands loose at her sides, made the other bikers shift uneasily. They'd expected fear, tears, pleading. Instead, they found themselves facing something they didn't understand, and that made them nervous. Ray glared at her for a long moment, his face twisted with confusion and anger. Then he turned sharply, stomping back to his bike. Let's go, he barked at his crew. This ain't over, woman. We'll be back when you least expect it. The bikers mounted up, engines roaring to life. They peeled out of the lot in a shower of gravel and exhaust smoke, their threats almost lost in the noise of their retreat. Morning light streamed through the shelter's windows, casting warm squares on the worn linoleum floor. Nadia stood before a group of veterans gathered in the main room. About 15 faces looked back at her, some curious, others wary. Marcus sat in the front, his usual easy smile replaced by focused attention. I called you here because we need to talk, Nadia began, her voice calm but firm. Most of you know about the incident at Bulldog's bar. What you don't know is that it's escalated. They've threatened the shelter, and that means they've threatened all of us. Murmurs rippled through the group. A few of the younger vets exchanged worried glances. Look, said Sarah Chen, a former Army medic who'd been coming to the shelter for 3 months. We all appreciate what you do here, Nadia, but maybe we should just call the police. I tried, Nadia replied, shaking her head. The sheriff made it clear whose side he's on. We're on our own. The room fell silent. These veterans knew what it meant to be without backup, to face threats alone. But that doesn't mean we're helpless, Nadia continued. She pulled out her wooden box, the one that held her medals, and set it on a nearby table. There's something you should know about me. Something that might help us all. She opened the box, revealing rows of decorations that made several veterans sit up straighter. Combat badges, distinguished service medals, and specialized qualification pins caught the morning light. I served 20 years, Nadia said, touching one of the medals. 15 of those with Delta Force. I wasn't just a soldier. I was a trainer. I taught elite operators how to survive when everything went wrong, how to protect themselves and others when they were outnumbered and alone. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Veterans who had been slumped in their chairs now sat upright, eyes fixed on Nadia with new understanding. For the last part of my career, I specialized in teaching small units how to handle siege situations, how to defend positions against superior numbers. Nadia looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. I can teach you those skills, not to attack or seek revenge, but to protect yourselves and this place we've built together. Marcus leaned forward. You're talking about self-defense training? Nadia nodded. Simple techniques. Effective ones. Ways to control situations without excessive force. Most importantly, I want to teach you how to work together, watch each other's backs." "I'm in," Marcus said immediately. "Me too," Sarah added, her earlier hesitation gone. One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Even Tom Wheeler, a quiet Vietnam vet who usually kept to himself, raised his hand in support. "All right then," Nadia said, closing her metal box. "Let's move this outside. The yard behind the shelter will work well for what I want to show you." They filed out into the morning air. The yard wasn't much, just a patch of grass with a few scattered picnic tables, but it was private, surrounded by a tall wooden fence. "First thing," Nadia said, standing in the center of the group, "forget what you've seen in movies. Real self-defense isn't about fancy moves or dramatic fights. It's about awareness, positioning, and simple techniques that work under stress." She demonstrated a basic stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. This is your foundation. Balance is everything. If someone grabs you, your first instinct might be to pull away. Instead, I want you to drop your weight and turn into them. Nadia called Marcus forward to help demonstrate. He played the aggressor, reaching for her arm. In one smooth motion, she shifted, turned, and used his own momentum to guide him off balance. "See? No strength needed. Just proper position and timing." She helped Marcus up. "Now pair up. We'll practice this slowly." The veterans formed pairs, somewhat awkwardly at first. Sarah worked with Jenny Torres, a former helicopter mechanic. Tom Wheeler partnered with Mike Collins, who'd served in Desert Storm. "Gentle movements," Nadia called out, moving between the pairs. "Focus on feeling the balance points. Don't muscle through it." At first, their movements were stiff, uncertain. But as they practiced, something began to change. Bodies remembered old training. Muscle memory kicked in. Laughter started to break out as partners took turns working through the techniques. "That's it, Sarah. Good pivot," Nadia encouraged. "Tom, try dropping your weight a little more. There you go." The morning sun climbed higher as they worked. Nadia showed them more techniques, how to break free from common holds, how to create space when cornered, how to fall safely if taken down. "Remember," she said, demonstrating a simple wrist release, "the goal isn't to fight. It's to create an opportunity to get away or call for help. No heroes, no unnecessary risks." Jenny, who had been quiet most of the morning, suddenly executed a perfect escape move, causing Sarah to stumble backward. Both women broke into surprised laughter. "I didn't think I could do that," Jenny exclaimed, looking at her hands with new appreciation. "You all can do more than you think," Nadia replied. "That's what today is about. Remembering your strength, your training, your ability to protect yourselves and each other." The yard filled with the sounds of movement and encouragement. Veterans who had arrived looking tense and worried now moved with growing confidence. They called out tips to each other, celebrated small victories, worked through difficulties together. Tom Wheeler, who had barely spoken all morning, managed to break free from a hold that had been giving him trouble. His usual distant expression cracked into a small but genuine smile. "Looking good, everyone," Nadia called out, watching Marcus help Mike perfect his stance. "This is just the beginning. We'll keep practicing, keep improving." The morning sun now bathed the yard in full light, glinting off determined faces and proud smiles. These weren't broken soldiers anymore. They were a community coming together, finding strength in unity and purpose in protecting what they'd built. Nadia sat in her parked car 2 blocks from Bulldog's den, the engine off and lights dark. The clock on her dashboard read 11:42 p.m. She'd noticed a pattern over the past few days. Every Tuesday night, Ray's crew gathered at the bar before heading out in a convoy around midnight. Tonight, she was ready. She wore dark clothes and comfortable boots, her hair tucked under a black cap. A small backpack held her camera with a telephoto lens, Equipment she hadn't touched since her surveillance days. Right on schedule, motorcycles roared to life in the bar's parking lot. Nadia counted 8 bikes, with Ray's distinctive chrome-covered Harley leading the pack. They pulled onto the main road, heading east. Nadia waited until they were half a block ahead before starting her car. She kept her lights off until the last possible moment, maintaining a careful distance. The skills came back naturally, counting the seconds between turns, watching for tail lights, staying just far enough back to avoid detection. The bikers wound through the sleeping town, eventually turning onto Industrial Drive. Old warehouses lined both sides of the street, most dark and silent at this hour. Ray's crew pulled up to a gray building with faded numbers, 1849. Nadia drove past slowly, noting the layout. She circled the block and parked behind an abandoned factory 2 buildings down. Moving silently, she retrieved her backpack and made her way through the shadows. A rusty fire escape on the adjacent building caught her eye. She tested the bottom rung. Solid enough. With practiced movements, she climbed, her boots making no sound on the metal steps. The roof offered a perfect vantage point overlooking the warehouse's loading dock. Below, Ray directed his men as they opened the warehouse doors. A box truck backed in, its engine humming quietly. Nadia set up her camera, adjusting the focus in the dim light. Through the lens, she watched Ray shake hands with the truck driver. The loading dock's security light illuminated their faces clearly. 2 bikers rolled up the truck's back door, revealing stacks of boxes. Nadia's finger pressed the shutter button repeatedly, capturing every detail. The men worked efficiently, transferring boxes from the truck to a storage area inside. Ray supervised, occasionally checking his phone and glancing around the empty street. He had no idea that 20 feet above, a former Delta Force commander was documenting everything. Nadia zoomed in on the boxes themselves. One had split open slightly, revealing packed bags of white powder. She photographed the marking on the box's side, a shipping label that could help trace its origin. A gust of wind carried voices up to her position. "Price went up," the truck driver was saying. "Suppliers getting nervous about heat from the feds." "Tell him to calm down," Ray replied. "Sheriff's in our pocket. Nobody's looking too close at anything around here." Nadia's camera clicked steadily. Ray counted out cash, handing it to the driver. The exchange was clear in her viewfinder. Faces, money, drugs, all documented with military precision. The operation took about 40 minutes. Nadia photographed the truck's license plate as it pulled away. She caught clear shots of each biker's face as they loaded their saddlebags with smaller packages from the boxes. Ray did a final check of the warehouse before closing up. Nadia captured him putting a key in his pocket and entering a code in the security panel. Her trained eye caught the number sequence: 5 to 2, 8, 1 to 9. The bikers mounted up and rode off into the night. Nadia waited 10 minutes, making sure they were gone before descending the fire escape. Her movements were as silent going down as they had been going up. Back in her car, she checked the camera's display. The photos were clear, damning. She had Ray and his entire operation documented. Faces, location, product, money changing hands. Everything needed to bring them down. The drive home took her through empty streets. Nadia remained alert, checking her mirrors for any signs of being followed. But the night was quiet, the bikers long gone to whatever holes they crawled into after their business was done. She pulled into her garage, closing the door before turning on any lights. Inside, she connected the camera to her printer. While the photos processed, she opened a small safe hidden behind a false panel in her closet. The images emerged one by one. Ray counting money, boxes of drugs being unloaded, clear faces of every participant, the truck's license plate, the shipping label, a complete record of the night's criminal enterprise. Nadia examined each photo carefully. her trained eye noting every detail that could be useful. She arranged them in sequence, creating a clear narrative of the operation. These weren't just pictures. They were evidence, captured with the precision of someone who had documented insurgent activities in war zones. The safe sat open, its contents sparse but significant. Her most important papers, a few items from her military service, and now these photos that could bring down Ray's entire organization. She placed the stack of images inside, along with the camera's memory card. As she turned the safe's dial, Nadia thought about timing. The photos were powerful, but using them required careful planning. Move too soon, and Ray might slip away. Wait too long, and he could hurt more people. The evidence needed to be deployed strategically, just like any other weapon in her arsenal. She closed the false panel, ensuring it was perfectly aligned with the surrounding wall. To any observer, the closet would appear ordinary, just clothes and shoes. But hidden behind that panel was enough evidence to shatter Ray's world. The shrill sound of sirens pierced the pre-dawn darkness, yanking Nadia from sleep. Her military instincts kicked in before her eyes fully opened. She was already pulling on boots when her phone buzzed. A text from one of her veterans. "Shelter on fire!" Her heart stopped for a beat. Then she was moving, grabbing her keys and racing to her car. The drive that usually took 10 minutes lasted an eternity, even as she pushed her sedan well above the speed limit. The glow of flames lit up the sky ahead, growing larger with each block. When she turned the final corner, the sight hit her like a physical blow. Orange flames engulfed the veteran's shelter, reaching toward the stars with hungry fingers. Black smoke billowed from broken windows. 2 fire trucks were already on scene, firefighters dragging hoses into position. But it was the scene in front of the building that made her blood run cold. Marcus lay on the ground, surrounded by other veterans. His right arm was an angry red, blisters already forming. His face was streaked with soot, and he coughed violently, trying to clear his lungs of smoke. Nadia sprinted forward, dropping to her knees beside him. "Marcus, what happened?" Her hands moved automatically, checking his vital signs like she'd done countless times in combat. "Ray's guys," Marcus managed between coughs. "Threw something through the window. It exploded." He winced as pain shot through his burned arm. "I was sleeping in the back office. Heard the glass break. Got everyone else out first." Other veterans clustered around them, some wrapped in blankets, others being treated by paramedics for smoke inhalation. The shelter had become a home for many of them, a safe place to rebuild their lives. Now they watched it burn, their faces reflecting both the flames and their shock. "How many were hurt?" Nadia asked, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "Just me, mostly," Marcus said. "Got the worst of it pulling Jerry out. He's got asthma, couldn't breathe in the smoke." He nodded toward an ambulance where Jerry sat with an oxygen mask. The heat from the fire pressed against them like a physical wall. Firefighters shouted commands, their hoses creating great arcs of water that seemed pitifully small against the inferno. The building's roof groaned ominously. Nadia noticed Marcus shivering despite the warmth. Shock was setting in. She pulled off her jacket and draped it over his shoulders, careful to avoid his injured arm. "The paramedics need to look at that burn." "In a minute," Marcus said. His good hand suddenly gripped hers with surprising strength. "They were laughing, Nadia. When they threw it in, I heard them laughing." The muscles in Nadia's jaw clenched. She'd seen that kind of cruelty before, in warlords who thought they were untouchable, who delighted in destroying others' sense of safety. But this wasn't some foreign battlefield. This was home. A crash drew their attention as part of the roof collapsed inward. Sparks shot skyward like a swarm of fireflies. The veterans flinched at the sound, too reminiscent of combat zones they'd left behind. "Everything we built," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "All the work we did, the counseling rooms, the workshop, it's all burning." Nadia watched the flames consume the place she'd poured her heart into for the past 2 years. The kitchen where they shared meals. The common room where veterans found friendship and understanding. The small library filled with books donated by the community. All of it turning to ash because Ray couldn't handle being humiliated by a woman. She thought of the photos in her safe, the evidence she'd gathered. She'd planned to be strategic, to take her time. But Ray had just changed the game. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Marcus coughed again, his whole body shaking with the effort. A paramedic approached with a medical kit, but Marcus waved her off for a moment. His eyes locked onto Nadia's, filled with pain, but also determination. "Don't let them win," he whispered, squeezing her hand. "We're soldiers. We don't let bullies win." The words hit Nadia like a physical force. She looked up at the burning building, watching years of work and hope disappear into the smoke. But buildings could be rebuilt. What mattered were the lives inside them. Lives Ray had just tried to destroy. Her training kicked in, analyzing the situation with cold clarity. Ray had escalated to attempted murder. He'd attacked not just her, but the vulnerable people she'd sworn to protect. In doing so, he'd given her all the justification she needed to respond with full force. The fire's reflection danced in her eyes as her resolve hardened into something dangerous. This wasn't just about defending herself anymore. This was about protecting her people, her mission, her purpose. Ray had just declared war on everything she held dear, and he was about to learn why that was a terrible mistake. Marcus gripped her hand tighter, reading the shift in her expression. He knew that look. He'd seen it in commanders before major operations. Nadia knelt beside him, sharing a moment of silent understanding with the young veteran who'd risked his life to save others. Chapter 10. Fire and Fury. Scene 2. Dawn broke over the smoking ruins of the veteran shelter, painting the sky in mocking shades of pink and gold. Nadia stood among the ashes, her boots crunching on charred debris as she surveyed the destruction. The acrid smell of burnt wood and melted plastic hung heavy in the air. Marcus stood beside her, his burned arm bandaged white against his dark skin. He'd refused to stay at the hospital, insisting on being here. Other veterans moved carefully through the wreckage, picking through what remained of their sanctuary. Some wore face masks against the lingering smoke, while others pulled on work gloves to shift through the debris. "The photo wall," someone said softly. Nadia turned to see Jerry, still wheezing slightly, holding the blackened remains of a frame. It had once displayed pictures of veterans who'd found their way back to civilian life through the shelter's programs. Now the memories were reduced to ash and melted plastic. Across the street, townspeople gathered in small clusters, watching. Some whispered behind raised hands, while others stared with undisguised fear. They all knew who was responsible, but no one dared say it aloud. Ray's influence cast a long shadow over the community. "Found something," called out Sarah, a former army nurse. She emerged from what had been the kitchen, holding a metal box. The shelter's petty cash and important documents, mostly salvageable, though smoke-stained. Small victories felt hollow today. Nadia moved methodically through the ruins, her trained eye cataloging everything. The main support beams had held, but the roof was gone. Most of the interior walls had collapsed. The counseling rooms where veterans once shared their struggles were now just scattered chunks of drywall and twisted metal. "Ma'am?" A young police officer approached hesitantly, notepad in hand. "We'll need your statement about last night." "Save your ink," Nadia replied, not looking at him. "We both know nothing will come of it." The officer shifted uncomfortably, but didn't argue. He knew as well as anyone that the sheriff wouldn't pursue this. More veterans arrived as the morning progressed. They came straight from work shifts or home, still wearing their civilian clothes, but carrying themselves with military bearing. Each one's face hardened as they saw the destruction, remembered pain mixing with fresh anger. "My tools," muttered Mike, a former Marine who'd taught woodworking classes in the shelter's workshop. He kicked aside a charred workbench. "All of them, gone. Even my grandfather's lathe." Nadia watched her people because that's what they were, her responsibility, her family. Pick through the wreckage of their dreams. The shelter had been more than just a building. It was where they'd found purpose again, where nightmares faded and hope grew. Ray hadn't just attacked property. He'd tried to destroy their healing. A news van pulled up, its reporter already rehearsing lines about tragic fire and investigation ongoing. Nadia intercepted them before they could start filming. "No comments," she said firmly. "This isn't your story to tell." The morning wore on. The veterans worked systematically, creating piles of salvageable items and clearing paths through the debris. They fell naturally into teams, coordinating without need for direction, muscle memory from their service days taking over. Marcus stumbled suddenly, his injured arm throwing off his balance as he tried to move a fallen beam. 3 veterans rushed to steady him, their movements quick and precise. The bond between them was visible, forged in service, strengthened in recovery, and now tempered by this new attack. "You should rest," Nadia told him, but Marcus shook his head. "Can't rest while there's work to do, Sergeant Major," he replied, using her old rank. Others had started doing that too, unconsciously falling back into military patterns as they faced this threat. Around noon, a truck pulled up. Old Mrs. Henderson from the diner stepped out, carrying huge containers of coffee and bags of sandwiches. "For your people," she said quietly to Nadia. "And I'm sorry for staying quiet so long about Ray and his bunch." More townspeople followed, bringing water, work gloves, trash bags. Small gestures of support, offered nervously but sincerely. The fear was still there, but something else was growing. A tentative resistance to the terror Ray had built his power on. Nadia gathered her veterans near what had been the shelter's entrance. They formed a loose circle, instinctively creating a security perimeter while they talked. Their faces were streaked with soot, their clothes dirty from the work, but their eyes were clear and focused. "Look around," she said, her voice carrying the command presence that had once led elite operators. "They thought this would break us, that we'd scatter, stay quiet, accept defeat." She gestured at the destruction. "But they forgot something important." The veterans straightened, sensing the shift in her tone. This wasn't just their counselor speaking now. This was a combat commander laying out a mission. They forgot that we're trained to fight back, that we understand tactical response, strategic planning, and most importantly, she paused, meeting each person's gaze. "We know how to work as a unit." Marcus stepped forward, his bandaged arm a stark reminder of last night's violence. "What's the plan, Sergeant Major?" Nadia swept her arm toward the ruined shelter, then toward the town beyond where Ray and his gang thought they ruled through fear. The morning's work had shown her something crucial. They weren't just victims seeking healing anymore. They were warriors who'd found their cause again. "We rebuild," she declared, her voice carrying across the ashes. Then her eyes hardened with steel resolve. "But first, we take the fight to them." The afternoon sun slanted through Nadia's dining room windows as she spread surveillance photos and local maps across the oak table. 8 veterans crowded around, their faces intent. The room smelled of coffee and determination. "Ray's compound sits here," Nadia said, tapping a spot on the map. 3 acres, surrounded by chain-link fence. Her finger traced the perimeter. 2 main entrances, plus a back gate they think nobody knows about. Marcus leaned forward, his bandaged arm resting carefully on the table's edge. Security cameras? Basic setup. 4 visible cameras, probably more we can't see. Nadia laid out several grainy photos showing the compound's exterior. But their weak point isn't their surveillance. It's their routine. She placed another photo showing bikers loading boxes into trucks. Every Tuesday and Friday, 4 a.m. Drug shipments go out. Local cops know to stay away. Her voice carried the precise tone she'd used planning missions overseas. That's when they're most vulnerable. Sarah, the former army nurse, studied the photos. Those aren't just drugs. Look at the size of those crates. She pointed to another image. And those girls getting into the van? Human trafficking. Nadia nodded grimly. Exactly. Ray's crew isn't just dealing meth. They're running girls through here, too. Young ones. She pulled out more photos, showing terrified faces through vehicle windows. The room temperature seemed to drop. Veterans who'd seen combat zones recognized the look of human suffering. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stopping predators. We'll need evidence that sticks, Mike said, the ex-Marine's voice hard. Something the feds can't ignore, even with a dirty sheriff. Already working on that. Nadia revealed a small device. High-resolution camera. Infrared capability. I've been documenting their operations for weeks. She smiled tightly. Old habits die hard. Jerry, still wheezing slightly from smoke inhalation, pointed to the compound's layout. What about guards? 3 regular night shifts. Nadia placed small markers on the map. 2 by the main gate, 1 roaming. They rotate every 2 hours, usually half asleep by dawn. She'd watched them for nights, learning their patterns. They're sloppy, overconfident. Just like their boss, Marcus muttered, touching his burned arm. Nadia pulled out more papers, building plans, guard schedules, vehicle logs. The veterans exchanged impressed looks. She'd been busy while they were focused on healing. We're not going in hot, she emphasized. This isn't a raid. We're gathering evidence and applying pressure. Make them sloppy. Force mistakes. Her finger tapped each position. Team 1 takes surveillance positions here and here. Team 2 documents the shipment loading. Team 3 covers our exit routes. The veterans absorbed the information with professional focus. This was familiar territory. Mission planning, strategic positioning, clear objectives. What about weapons? Someone asked. Defensive only. No firearms. Nadia's tone left no room for debate. We're not soldiers anymore. We're citizens stopping criminals. Everything we do has to be legal and documented. She revealed a stack of small cameras and communication devices. These are our weapons now. Every interaction recorded. Every threat documented. We build a case they can't bury. The veterans nodded, understanding. They'd fought enough wars to know that sometimes the smartest victory comes without firing a shot. Their compound has blind spots here and here. Nadia marked locations on the map. We'll position cameras to cover their loading dock. Every face, every license plate, every crate gets recorded. Marcus studied the timeline she'd drawn. Dawn gives us the best light for photos, plus their guard change confusion. And their cockiness, Mike added. They think they've scared everyone into silence. They won't expect anyone to stand up to them. Nadia laid out small radio earpieces. Communications are crucial. We work as a unit, just like we trained. Any sign of trouble, we pull back. No heroics. The veterans handled the equipment with familiar ease. These tools might be different from their military gear, but the principles were the same. Coordinate, communicate, complete the mission. What about the sheriff? Sarah asked. He'll try to interfere if he catches wind of this. Let him. Nadia's smile was sharp. Every move he makes to protect them is more evidence for the feds. I've got friends in the FBI who are very interested in corrupt local officials. The room hummed with focused energy. These veterans had spent months working through trauma, learning to live with their wounds. Now they had a mission again, not overseas, but right here at home. "Questions?" Nadia asked, surveying the group. Each veteran met her gaze steadily. They'd reviewed the plans, understood their roles, committed to the mission. Just like old times, but with higher stakes. This wasn't about following orders, it was about protecting their community. "Good." Nadia checked her watch. "We move at dawn. Get some rest. Check your equipment. Be at your positions by 0400. The veterans straightened, unconsciously adopting military bearing. They studied the maps one last time, memorizing routes and positions. Years of training came flooding back. The discipline, the focus, the unity of purpose. "Remember," Nadia said quietly, "we're not just doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for every person in this town who's lived in fear of Ray's crew. For every girl in those trafficking vans. For everyone who thought they had to stay silent." The veterans nodded in agreement. Dawn would find them ready, positioned around the compound, cameras and evidence logs prepared. They would strike not with violence, but with truth, exposing the darkness Ray had built his power on. Gray light crept over the horizon as Nadia led her team through the morning mist. Their footsteps whispered across wet grass, 8 shadows moving like ghosts toward Ray's compound. The chain-link fence loomed ahead, security lights creating pools of harsh brightness. Marcus touched his radio earpiece. "Camera 1 in position," he murmured from his surveillance spot. "Copy that." Nadia's voice was barely a breath. She gestured to Mike and Sarah, who broke off toward the security system's power box. Their dark clothes blended with the pre-dawn shadows. Through her night vision monocular, Nadia watched the guard at the main gate. He slouched in his chair, phone glowing in his hands, exactly as her surveillance had shown. Predictable. Sloppy. "Ready with the cutters," Jerry whispered through the radio. He and 2 other veterans had circled to the compound's far side, where rows of motorcycles gleamed dully in the dim light. Nadia checked her watch. 4:17 a.m. The drug shipment would be loading soon. "Execute," she commanded softly. Mike's hands moved swiftly at the power box, bypassing the alarm system with practiced ease. Sarah kept watch, her military training evident in her perfectly still posture. Within seconds, the security camera's red lights winked out. The guard never looked up from his phone. At the back of the compound, Jerry's team moved between the parked motorcycles. Sharp metal tools glinted as they methodically punctured tire after tire. The bikes would still stand, but wouldn't roll. The damage wouldn't be visible until someone tried to ride. Nadia touched her earpiece. "Status?" "Cameras disabled," Mike reported. "Vehicles neutralized," Jerry added. "Surveillance in position," Marcus confirmed. "Loading docks clear and recorded." Everything was going according to plan. Nadia felt the familiar calm of a well-executed operation settling over her. This wasn't so different from missions overseas. Identify the target, neutralize defenses, gather evidence. The guard's phone chimed with a message. He stood, stretching, and walked toward the compound's back door. Probably a bathroom break. Another pattern Nadia had counted on. "Moving to Phase 2, she murmured. Sarah and Mike slipped through the shadows toward the main building's electrical panel. This blackout needed perfect timing. Too early would alert them, too late would miss the evidence they needed. Inside the compound, voices grew louder. The loading crew was starting their workday. Truck engines rumbled to life. Metal doors scraped open. "First truck moving to dock," Marcus reported from his hidden position. His camera clicked quietly, documenting every face, every license plate. Nadia moved closer, using the parked vehicles as cover. Through gaps between trucks, she could see Ray directing workers, his voice carrying in the pre-dawn quiet. "Move it, you lazy bastards! We're behind schedule!" More bikers emerged from the building, carrying crates and boxes. Some led young women, their faces fearful in the harsh lights. Sarah's sharp intake of breath crackled through the radio. Seeing trafficking victims up close was different from studying photos. Steady, Nadia reminded her team. Document everything. Camera shutters clicked softly from multiple positions. Every angle covered, every criminal act recorded. The evidence pile grew with each passing minute. Ray stalked between the trucks, shoving workers who moved too slowly. His confident swagger showed no hint of worry about surveillance or interference. Why should he worry? He owned this town. Package loaded, a biker called. Ready to roll. That was their cue. Nadia touched her radio. Cut the power, now! The compound plunged into darkness. Shouts of surprise and anger erupted. Flashlight beams stabbed through the gloom as bikers stumbled into each other. What the hell? Ray's voice boomed. Get those lights back on! But when workers tried starting their trucks, nothing happened. Mike had done more than cut power. He'd disabled the engines, too. The whole operation ground to a halt. Confusion turned to panic as bikers discovered their motorcycles wouldn't start either. Jerry's team had worked thoroughly. No quick escapes today. Ray's curses echoed across the compound. Find out what's happening! Now! Nadia moved through the chaos like a shadow, her team spreading out to control key positions. Years of night operations had taught them how to use darkness as an ally. Emergency lights sputtered to life, running on backup power. In their sickly yellow glow, Ray spotted Nadia standing calmly in the middle of his loading dock. Recognition and rage twisted his face. You! He reached behind his back, pulling out a hunting knife. I'll gut you myself. Around them, bikers formed a loose circle, hungry for violence. But none moved to help. Ray had to handle this himself, or lose face forever. Nadia stood relaxed, hands loose at her sides. Last chance to surrender, Ray. Make it easier on yourself. He charged with a roar, knife slashing in a wild arc. But Nadia had been training against armed attackers since before he joined his first bike gang. She stepped inside his reach, grabbed his knife arm, and twisted. The blade clattered to the ground. Ray howled as she forced him face down, her knee in his back, his arm locked painfully behind him. The whole takedown took less than 3 seconds. Stay down, she commanded, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent compound. It's over. Ray struggled uselessly against her hold. Around them, his gang watched their leader pinned helplessly by the woman they'd tried to humiliate. Their world of intimidation and fear was crumbling. Through her earpiece, Marcus's voice crackled. Got it all on camera, every second. Nadia kept her knee pressed firmly against Ray's back as she pulled a zip tie from her pocket. The plastic fastener snapped tight around his wrists with a satisfying click. Around the compound, her veterans efficiently secured the other gang members, their military training evident in their swift, precise movements. Marcus, she called out, start the upload. From his surveillance position, Marcus began transmitting their evidence to secure servers. Photos and videos of drug shipments, human trafficking, and Ray's assault streamed to waiting federal authorities. Years of the gang's crimes, documented in high resolution. Nadia pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Agent Cooper. The voice was crisp, professional. Sierra Delta 719. Nadia stated her old operational code. Remember that favor you owe me from Kandahar? There was a pause, then a low whistle. Sergeant Major Carter. Been a long time. I've got a situation here that needs federal attention. Drug trafficking, human smuggling, organized crime, all gift-wrapped and ready for pickup. Text me the location. Teams are spinning up now. Nadia sent the compound's coordinates and turned to her veterans. Feds incoming. secure the perimeter, and watch for runners. The next 20 minutes passed in tense silence. Ray squirmed occasionally under his restraints, but a firm press of Nadia's boot kept him still. His gang members sat in clusters, surrounded by alert veterans who'd found new purpose in their mission. The first hint of approaching sirens made the bikers stir uneasily. Flashing lights painted the compound walls in red and blue as unmarked SUVs and tactical vehicles surrounded the entrance. Armed federal agents poured out, weapons raised. FBI. "Nobody move!" Agent Cooper strode through the gate, his badge gleaming. He was older than Nadia remembered, gray threading his temples, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He surveyed the scene, dozens of bikers zip-tied on the ground, scared trafficking victims being gently assisted by Sarah, and stacks of evidence boxes under Jerry's guard. "Impressive work," Cooper nodded to Nadia. "Just like old times." "The evidence is comprehensive," she replied, "including documentation of local law enforcement collaboration." Cooper's eyebrows rose. "The sheriff? Cal Wilkes. He's been running interference for years, taking payoffs, burying complaints, intimidating victims." "Well then," Cooper smiled grimly, "let's pay him a visit." As FBI teams secured the compound and began processing evidence, Cooper dispatched units to the sheriff's office. Nadia watched Ray being hauled to his feet by agents, his face twisted with impotent rage. "This isn't over," Ray snarled at her. Nadia met his glare calmly. "Actually, it is. Your operation is done, your gang is finished, and you'll have plenty of time to think about why you shouldn't have touched me that night." The sky was brightening as more vehicles arrived. DEA agents began cataloging the drug shipments, while FBI human trafficking specialists gently interviewed the rescued women. The compound buzzed with professional activity, the kind of coordinated response Nadia had missed since leaving Delta Force. Marcus approached, tablet in hand. All footage uploaded and backed up. They won't be able to bury this one. A commotion at the gate drew their attention. Sheriff Wilkes was being led in, handcuffs glinting on his wrists. His usual smug expression had vanished, replaced by shocked disbelief as he saw the scale of the federal operation. "You can't do this," Wilkes protested. "I'm the law here." "Not anymore," Cooper replied, showing him the warrant. "We have documented evidence of your corruption going back 5 years. Witness statements, financial records, surveillance footage." Wilkes's face reddened as he spotted Nadia. "You!" he spat. "This is your doing?" "You had a choice," Nadia said quietly. "When I came to report harassment and threats, you could have done your job. Instead, you chose to be part of the problem." Agent Cooper guided the sheriff toward a waiting vehicle. "We'll be reviewing every case you've handled, every complaint you've dismissed. Your kingdom is about to get a thorough cleaning." The veterans gathered near Nadia as they watched the arrests unfold. The morning sun painted the sky pink and gold, a new day dawning literally and figuratively. Mike clapped softly, starting a quiet wave of applause that spread through the group. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "I never thought we'd see justice here." "The system works," Nadia replied, "when good people stand up and make it work." Jerry grinned, his old spark returning. "Just like you taught us. Face the threat, plan the response, execute with precision." Marcus touched the burn scars on his arm, still healing from the shelter fire. "They thought they could break us. Instead, we got stronger." They watched as FBI vehicles began departing, carrying Ray, Wilkes, and the other arrested gang members. The trafficking victims were escorted to specialized care transport, finally free from their captors. Evidence teams continued documenting the scene, building an airtight case against the criminal enterprise. Cooper returned to Nadia's group. "The U.S. attorney is already drafting indictments. With this evidence, we're looking at multiple federal charges, lengthy sentences. He paused, studying her team. "You've built quite a unit here." "They built themselves," Nadia corrected. "They just needed to remember who they are." The veterans stood straighter at her words, pride replacing the uncertainty that had haunted them since leaving service. They had faced evil in their own hometown and emerged victorious, not through violence, but through disciplined, coordinated action. A gentle cheer rose from the group, not the loud celebration of battlefield victory, but the quiet satisfaction of justice properly served. They had protected their community, upheld their values, and reminded themselves that their training and teamwork still mattered in civilian life. The autumn sun warmed the fresh paint on the veteran shelter's walls. What had risen from the ashes was far grander than before. A two-story building with modern facilities, counseling rooms, and a fully equipped workshop. The sign above the entrance read, "Carter Veterans Recovery Center," though Nadia had argued against using her name. Marcus stood at the front desk, his burned arm now healing pink beneath the bandages. He greeted a young veteran who'd just arrived, his gentle smile and steady presence immediately putting the newcomer at ease. The burns would leave scars, but he wore them like badges of honor, proof that he'd stood up for what was right. "Got another one interested in the mechanics program," Marcus called to Nadia as she passed through the lobby. She nodded, pride warming her chest. The federal funding hadn't just rebuilt their walls, it had expanded their mission. Now they offered job training, therapy, and community support services. The workshop where Marcus taught basic auto repair was always full. "Good morning, Sergeant Major," called Mrs. Henderson from the kitchen. The elderly woman had started volunteering after the arrests, bringing home-cooked meals 3 times a week. She wasn't the only one. Townsfolk who'd once looked away now showed up daily, offering help, donations, and friendship. "Just Nadia," she corrected gently, accepting a cup of coffee. The morning sun streamed through new windows, catching the steam rising from her cup. Sarah burst through the front door, waving a newspaper. "They're going away for good," she announced, spreading the paper on the counter. The headline declared, "Biker gang leaders sentenced, 20-plus years for drug trafficking, racketeering." The veterans gathered around, reading with satisfaction. Ray Bulldog Maddox's scowling mugshot glared up from the page beside a smaller photo of former Sheriff Wilkes being led into court. Federal prosecutors said it was one of the most comprehensive cases they'd ever seen, Sarah read aloud. Evidence provided by local veterans group proved instrumental in securing convictions. "That's your handiwork," Marcus said to Nadia. "Your planning made it airtight." She shook her head. "We did it together. Every one of you played your part." The center hummed with activity as more veterans arrived for morning programs. In the workshop, Jerry was teaching basic welding to 3 former Marines. The art therapy room echoed with laughter, as Mike's jokes lightened the mood during a PTSD support session. Through the window, Nadia watched townsfolk wave as they passed. The fear that had gripped this community was gone. People walked taller, smiled more freely, knowing the predators who'd terrorized them were behind bars. "Mail's here," Marcus announced, sorting through envelopes. "More donations." "Oh, and another letter from the governor's office." Nadia took the official envelope. The governor wanted to present her with a civilian service medal. She'd declined twice already. This wasn't about medals or recognition. A pickup truck pulled up outside, loaded with lumber. Local contractors had been donating materials and time to build an expansion. A women's wing to help female veterans transition back to civilian life. "Need help unloading?" Marcus called through the open door. "Got it covered," replied Tom Baker, the hardware store owner. "Got my whole crew here today." He'd been sending supplies since the rebuilding began, insisting on charging only for materials. Nadia watched the community working together, the barrier between veterans and civilians dissolving. This was what healing looked like, not just new walls and programs, but people finding their strength together. As the day wound down, Nadia gathered her things. "Heading out early?" Marcus asked. "Got somewhere to be," she replied. They both knew where. It had become a weekly ritual. The evening air was cool as she drove through town. Bulldog's Den came into view, though the sign had changed. Under new management, it was simply the Den now, the Confederate flag that once flew outside replaced by an American one. Nadia parked in the same spot she had that fateful night. Inside, the bar had been cleaned up, the bikers' memorabilia replaced with military service photos and local sports teams. The floor had been refinished, the lights brightened. Conversations quieted as she entered, but not from fear. Heads nodded respectfully as she passed. The bartender, a former Navy corpsman, already had her usual whiskey ready. "On the house," he said, sliding the glass forward. Nadia settled onto her chosen stool, the same one she'd occupied when Ray made his fatal mistake. The bar around her was different now. Families shared early dinners in booths. Veterans gathered for weekly meetups. Locals relaxed without looking over their shoulders. A young woman at the end of the bar caught her eye and raised a glass slightly. She was one of the trafficking victims they'd rescued, now working as a counselor at the women's shelter. Nadia returned the gesture with a small nod. The room's atmosphere was relaxed but watchful. Everyone knew who she was now, what she represented. Not just a former Delta Force commander, but someone who'd stood up when standing up was hard. Someone who'd shown them they didn't have to accept corruption and abuse as normal. The whiskey was smooth on her tongue as she took that first sip. Sun slanted through clean windows, dust motes dancing in the golden light. The Den had become what every bar should be, a gathering place for the community, safe and welcoming to all. No one approached her with anything less than respect. No one dared. But it wasn't fear that kept them polite. It was admiration. She had shown them what one person with conviction could accomplish. More importantly, she had shown them what they could achieve together. The bartender caught her eye and nodded, a gesture of deep respect. Nadia raised her glass slightly, acknowledging him and all that had changed. The room remained quiet and watchful as she took another slow sip, savoring not just the whiskey, but the peace that comes with true vindication. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have hand-picked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.